Are you an ADHDer who struggles with people-pleasing tendencies and who has a lack of healthy boundaries to protect your energy? If so, then this video is for you, because today we are going to dive into why so many of us with ADHD tend to feel like we're being taken advantage of at times because we are too quick to say yes. Then we will chat about some systems and tips that you can put in place so that your energy is protected and you know exactly how to deal with this tendency that so many of us struggle with by not being a people pleaser and having really healthy, firm boundaries in place. And if you're a woman who's late diagnosed with ADHD and you're struggling to manage your ADHD, then I want to let you know that I'm here to help, because I also have ADHD and I know firsthand how hard it can be at times. So I've dedicated my life to helping women thrive post-ADHD diagnosis. There is a link to get on a free consultation call with me in the description of this video. I'd love to chat with you to see how I can support you. Let's begin by understanding the reasons why we struggle with healthy boundaries and people-pleasing tendencies. The first reason is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or more commonly known as RSD. And all RSD is perceived or actual rejection. Now, this rejection we can feel from others, but we can also feel this rejection from ourselves, which is why so many of us struggle with imposter syndrome and perfectionism. And I just want to go into a really quick story time to explain how RSD is really a visceral response to rejection. When I was a little girl, maybe around 7 or 8 years old, I dropped a pot off the stove. It wasn't hot or anything, but it fell off the stove and it landed on my toe, and my toenail turned black, and a couple months later, it actually fell off. It was really, really painful. Now, I'm 48 years old at the time of making this video, and this happened when I was 7 or 8 years old. And I still, to this day, even if I drop a pillow off my bed, jump back because I remember the pain that went along with that pot landing on my toe. I kind of believe that RSD is the same thing. The average child with ADHD will hear 20,000 pieces of negative feedback next to a neurotypical child, whether they're diagnosed with ADHD or not. So we almost have this jumping back response that's innately ingrained into us because we're so ready to be rejected again because we've had so much rejection or criticism in the past. So some of us might not have healthy boundaries and might be habitual people pleasers because we're trying to mitigate the chances that we are going to feel rejected if we say no or put a boundary in place. The second reason that we might struggle with boundaries and people pleasing is our low self-esteem, as just mentioned. Many of us with ADHD experience low self-esteem due to a history of perceived failures, misunderstandings, or criticism. So RSD and low self-esteem really do play major roles in why we struggle with boundaries and people pleasing. And the reason I'm explaining all of these things is so that you can have these introspective moments to go, hey, yeah, I do struggle with my self-esteem. Maybe that's something that I can work on, which will inevitably help you create better boundaries and less people pleasing in the future. And we're going to get into all of that later on in this video. Number 3 is impulsivity. Impulsivity is a core symptom of ADHD, which can manifest as a tendency to seek immediate approval or validation. This can lead to us agreeing to things without considering our personal limits or long-term consequences of us saying yes, making it hard to say no and to maintain healthy boundaries. The fourth reason that we struggle with boundaries and people pleasing is emotional dysregulation as well as rumination. ADHD often comes with challenges in regulating our emotions. We may struggle to manage feelings of guilt, anxiety, or the fear of disappointing others. I don't know about you, but I've definitely struggled with managing my feelings of guilt and anxiety and fear of disappointing people. I am a recovering people pleaser here. And these intense emotions can drive us to prioritize others' needs over our own, compromising our boundaries in an attempt to avoid emotional discomfort. And the fifth reason that we might struggle with healthy boundaries and people pleasing is our executive function challenges. ADHD often affects executive function such as planning, decision making, and self-monitoring. These challenges can make it more difficult for ADHDers to identify when our boundaries are being crossed or overextending ourselves to please others. Without clear internal cues or effective self-regulation strategies, we may struggle to set or enforce healthy boundaries. And this is exactly how I support women who are late diagnosed with ADHD. And it is truly my passion because, again, I know exactly how hard it is to manage ADHD, people pleasing, and managing emotions, especially as we get older. If you are struggling with the emotional aspects of having ADHD, there is a link below to get on a free consultation call. I'd love to connect and to be able to support you. All right, let's get into how to create healthier boundaries now. There are 3 C's for healthy boundaries, and the first one is the boundary clear? Vague boundaries can feel really confusing for both you and the person you're creating the boundary for. Part of our people pleasing can come off as us being wishy-washy, and the way to remedy this is to practice the power of the pause first. If you're not sure how you feel about a request, for example, you can simply say, let me get back to you on this. I need to make sure I'm able to follow through before committing. And the power of the pause is really in place so that we can interrupt impulsivity, which I mentioned earlier as a reason why we might struggle with boundaries in the first place. You can also practice getting comfortable saying no. And this one is going to be really uncomfortable for the people pleasers listening today, and I get it. As I mentioned earlier, I am a people pleaser in recovery myself. The way to implement this is to develop a few go-to phrases for saying no politely but firmly, such as, I appreciate the offer, but I need to focus on my current commitments. Or you can say, that sounds great, but I'm not able to take on anything else right now. You can practice these phrases to build confidence in using them. I promise the more you practice them, the more empowered you will feel. The second C is the boundary concise? This further reinforces the clearness of the boundary. And being concise does not mean that you need to over-explain your reasons for putting the boundary in place in the first place. I believe so many of us with ADHD feel the need to over-explain because so many of us have dealt with rejection in the past. And if RSD is something that you've struggled with in the past, I do have some RSD videos linked below. The urge to over-explain yourself might come up for you, or the person you've put the boundary up might ask why you're putting the boundary up. If they ask and you don't want to explain, just tell them that you'd like to keep the reason to yourself, or simply that you have other priorities right now. Both of these statements are true yet concise and polite. The urge to people please is simply a self-esteem issue that you're struggling with, and I've added tips to building an unshakable sense of self video in the description of this video as well. I highly recommend you checking it out if you do struggle with your self-esteem, because evidently the more confident you are, the less likely you'll be to be a people pleaser, plain and simple. And finally, are you being consistent with your boundaries? Consistency is our third C. And I like to think about parenting. My kids are grown now, and consistency as an ADHDer. I remember when my kids were young, they would maybe not behave, and I would tell them, okay, as a consequence, you can't go outside for the rest of the day, or you can't have dessert until you finish your dinner. And then to either get them to stop complaining because maybe my bandwidth was low, or I would forget the boundary that I had put up and not follow through on my consequence, I ended up being a doormat to my kids. And they knew mom might get mad and ground us, but 5 minutes later, she'll forget that she grounded us and she will let us go outside. So being consistent is really, really important when you're putting boundaries in place. Because evidently, and this is really, really important for you to take in, we teach people how to treat us. And if your boundaries aren't consistent, then that can not only be confusing, but it also shows those around us that if they push us enough, we'll eventually buckle under the pressure. So the most important thing that you can do when deciding on a boundary that you'd like to put into place is if you can follow through. It's really important to not put a boundary in place when your emotional state is heightened, for example, because we all struggle to say what we mean when we're upset. We're in that emotional brain. For example, if I have a work boundary where I tell an employee, let's say I'm a business owner with employees, that I'm unavailable after 6 p.m. on weekdays and not available on weekends, and then still answer calls from them outside of my working hours, do you think they will pay attention to my words? Don't call or email me outside of my working hours, or my actions, picking up the phone on nights and on my weekends. There was a clear and concise boundary put in place of when I am and when I'm not available. The consistency of the boundary really sets a tone, and it's why we have that saying, we teach people how to treat us. It's important to not only create boundaries when you're emotionally regulated and then follow through. And remember, there is nothing wrong with utilizing the power of the pause to combat impulsivity. When utilizing the power of the pause, I like 24 hours. So if someone comes to me and says, can you do X, Y, and Z for me? And I'm not sure how I feel about that in the moment. I'm not sure if I have time or the emotional or mental bandwidth to do it, or physical bandwidth, then I might say, let me sleep on it and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Please share in the comments if you struggle with healthy boundaries and people pleasing, or if you have systems in place that really help others to have stronger boundaries and to avoid people pleasing behavior. Thank you so much again, and I will see you next week in the next video.